Let me tell you a story of Earth, the true history of Earth that is not disclosed, yet hidden in plain sight. Long ago, thousands of years ago, before the Romans, before the first empires that we know of today in the year 2021, before the first pharaohs of dynastic Egypt, there was another continent in the Atlantic Ocean. This continent was known as Atlantis. And Plato, the great Greek philosopher, describes very little of Atlantis. There's so much wonder, advancements, and creative renaissance that Plato does not discuss about. Atlantis, in the world of the Greeks, later the Romans, has evidence all across the Aegean, even Mediterranean seas, going all the way to Spain and reaching the Atlantic. And the last Atlantean surviving culture, known as the Minoans, that later became the Mycenaeans, that later became what we think of as Greeks. The Minoans were quite seafaring people. They could travel the Aegean Sea swiftly with ease. The Minoans, different from the Mycenaeans, were working with an Atlantean artistry that was still remembered, yet quickly fading as time is moving into a new era. Minoans were belonging to a matriarchal society that had teachings belonging to Lemuria, which is the sort of mother of Atlantis. And one asks, what are these sacred teachings? When we think of hieroglyphics, holy writing belonging to the Egyptians, and their rituals and ceremonies and spiritual practices of some kind of interdimensional communication with other versions of themselves, other timelines, other places of existence, maybe within this solar system, maybe without this solar system. This matriarchal society had what we would call knowledge of the yogi, knowledge of the meditative space, knowledge of transcendental space, and the esoterics that sort of weave this universe into principles, laws of organization, creation, and how it moves, how it bends, how it shifts, how it can be altered, how it can be even manipulated, how it can be measured, and it can expand and contract, and how it can be led, and how we can navigate it, the complexity, the amazingness of it. And this matriarchal society of just the Mannonians in the island of Crete had this. These esoterics that we today, we experience through religion. But this particular spiritual connection was not bound to religion. It was a divinity study, a divinity school that belonged to the divinity schools of Atlantis and earlier Lemuria, known as one of the first sort of advanced civilizations that we've had on planet Earth. And as time moves, as time always moves, and there's always a progression to things, and everything's always shifting over periods of thousands of years into new eras of exploration and discovery, and nothing is ever the same. The Mannonians began to fade, and the Mycenaeans began to rise, and creating a completely different timeline that we walk today, where we don't remember these esoteric teachings, but it's deep within ourselves, beyond the boundaries of our limitations, within the metaphysical spirituality of our knowingness, beingness. So like the ancient Egyptians, we think of the great pharaohs who created the pyramids. But the great pharaohs did not create the pyramids. Something else created the pyramids, and it wasn't the pharaohs. And the pyramids are not tombs, as we like to believe they are. And the Sphinx itself is much older than what we believe it to be. It's belonging to a completely different civilization that, yes, is in relationship to ancient or dynastic Egypt, but dynastic Egypt doesn't even have the capacity to fully exalt the technology of their elders. Simply, the dynastic Egyptians just don't have the smarts, we'll say, to be able to continue the elders' work into the future, which is declining quite quickly over centuries of time, entering to what we know as the Dark Age. So what we think of as our history is just simply a cycle belonging to a larger cycle, which is a 26,000 year planetary progression in which we raise consciousness for about 12,500, and then we lower consciousness for about 12,500 years. And this constant sort of movement with time and space, right? And we call this period of declining consciousness as a rest, right? Why do we sleep, right? We sleep a third of our life because we need to rest. We can't just expand, do, create. There has to be balance. So what we know as a period of darkness, where we are moving away from the center of the universe, or we'll say the center of our galaxy. And in that sort of movement away from the center of our galaxy, it appears that we're going through darkness. So we're leaving the knowledge behind. We're leaving connection behind. And going into this darkness is almost like a deep sleep. But in this deep sleep, we experience what we can call those who take advantage. Lucifer rebellions. They take advantage of those who cannot see through the darkness, which is basically mystery. And since we turn away from the knowledge and and kind of go into this period of rest where we're not necessarily creating or evolving in such a way of advancements in technology or science or spirituality. We're just kind of going through this period of living connection to this earth without needing to do anything, without needing to build or to create. And then after a while, so many thousands of years, we get back to it. We slowly, steadily create and sort of remember what we already know. And that's where we're at right now. We're coming out of this 12,500 year cycle where we are sleeping. Yes, and as we have advancements, we think of the ancient Egyptians, and we think of these empires that have created success and philosophies, but there's a period of time when we're absolutely just chilling, relaxing, not needing to create or think, where you can just kind of let things be for a little bit, to get a breather before we go back into our creative renaissance with the universe. So we're coming now, we're sort of slingshotting around, moving back into the center of the galaxy, where we're facing it, we're moving towards it yet again. And this is known as the cycle of light. And light is just simply about clarity. You have a knowing, you have awakening to the knowledge and esoterics on creation and how everything kind of comes together. And we see that in our 2021 history that we've had just being alive in the last 3 generations, how quickly we've just remembered things that we already know and we've already experienced and we've already excelled at many, many times. It's just a matter of fact of, will we repeat the same mistakes? Will we repeat the same cycle that we've had? Or will we have a new one? And we are having a new sort of experience with the Light Age moving forward that's going to be very different from the Light Age of Lemuria and Atlantis. The Light Age of the Syrian Egypt before dynastic Egypt. We are human species that is getting mature. We've been around for some time, a lot longer than what we know, 500,000 years, 1 million years. And we've experienced things and has made us wiser. So we're not adolescents anymore. We are becoming mature in our relationship with technology, or hopefully we will become mature and more knowledgeable and discerning, because our ancestors, will say, belonging to advanced civilizations of Atlantis, did not possess this kind of wise maturity. Yes, may have advancements in certain things, but maturity comes with experience. It doesn't just happen. You get technology and then you're mature. No, it's an experience of a failure and character development and all these kinds of lessons that we must learn to kind of get to this maturity. A child who has access to the computer doesn't necessarily mean that they're mature. It's an experience the child has as it goes through life that makes one wise, learning lessons of discernment and boundaries and self-esteem and community and leadership. And because we have the remembrance of Atlantis and Lemuria, it's making us more mature in our go-around with this next experience of our life, which is going to involve technology and spirituality, both, as the story of Atlantis involved both, spirituality and then technology. But for us now, it's more technology and then moving deeper into spirituality as a way to learn our lessons and have some kind of mastery right? So that we don't make the same mistakes Atlantis did. Every great civilization requires great accountability and maturity. That really makes all the difference when it comes to a civilization's ability to have a balanced advanced civilization. As you know, there's many, many advanced civilizations just in this great universe, and some of them are very mature and some of them are not. Some of them, as we will discover on Mars, yes, they may be like a 70-year-old man with their technology and their experience, and they know things and very smart, but are quite imbalanced because in growing and evolving and advancing, they missed something. They made a mistake. And that what's led to the Martians' constant war among tribes that just kept going and going and going almost endlessly until Mars eventually came to a collapse. Because advanced technology with people who are warlike is not a good combination. Especially those who can't possess a sort of voice of reason, who are so into their stubborn sort of ego or their logical mind and that masculine sort of I am, without a sort of a moment of peace, clarity, or sort of a tranquility, willing to be compassionate and willing to compromise is very, very hot, very heavy, and can be very destructive. So going to Atlantis thousands of years ago, Atlantis being a beautiful continent that is now underwater, of course. And it took several thousands of years for it to completely get underwater. It didn't just happen overnight. It took thousands of years for it to completely kind of leave the dimension, we'll say, as we kind of dropped into this third dimension out of the fifth dimension through this lowering consciousness. So Atlantis was a very beautiful place. It was what we think of, had warm temperatures, it had rivers, it had mountains, it had forests, it had sort of a species of animals and species of fish, and these beings were quite seafaring. But they also possessed technologies that we think of flying machines, but are different from planes. These flying machines don't make sound and are faster. It's kind of like when you're riding through Spain on those little speeding trains where it doesn't even make a sound. All you hear is a little electric kind of surge going on. And it goes fast. I think it goes 900 miles, 400 per hour. Very much like that. Working with the electromagnetic energy of Earth. And the Atlanteans originally were Lemurians from the Pacific Ocean, and all these sort of Lemuria was all these kind of islands. When we think of, the Hawaiian Islands and the Eastern Island and the sort of Indonesian sort of little islands, and there's so many islands, right, in this area of the Pacific Ocean that are all somewhat connected in relationship to the bigger sort of island, which really wasn't one sort of body of land. It was actually multiple bodies of land that were all kind of somewhat separated by seas, or what we call a little ocean. It was kind of just all these little islands together, bigger and small, and so many that you can barely count on your fingers and toes. And over time, of course, the Lemurians, these islands began to get underwater. They began to sink into the sea. And the Lemurians had to leave and go to Atlantis, which is a continent that would be their next place of residency. And again, this is over thousands of years, a period of time. And the Lemurians, they were like the Minoans. They were very feminine, working with sacred teachings and ceremonies and rituals very similar to the goddesses of ancient Egypt. This culture was very much a goddess, right? We think of today in our religion as the god. You know, Brahman is the god, of Allah is the god. We think of Jesus Christ as the Son of God. And there's a lot of, mostly stories of men. But these were stories of women. And their journey of uncovering the universe through their own meditative practice. So a lot of these sort of sacred teachings became the sacred teachings that are, we think, practiced in a lot of these more meditative schools of art and science. Have to do with spirituality. When we think of the Tibetan monks or the Buddhists, are relatively young in our history compared to the goddesses and the yogis of a more remote past. A lot of these practices we see in temples or in synagogues or in churches that have to do with uncovering the universe through your own mind and going within to see yourself as the divine is very ancient to this earth. And it goes long before our idea of religion. So Lemurians went to Atlantis. And Lemurians began to take home on Atlantis and began to continue their lives and their study, right? Atlanteans originally, in the more Lemurian kind of essence, were very much like the Taoists. When we think of the Taoists as beings who are very much connected to nature, who have compassion and acceptance, who practice poetry and maybe philosophy that is very connected to one's feelings and emotions, and connected to beauty, beauty that is natural, beauty of your soul. And though these Lemurians they had advancements in technology through the sacred geometry they learned. The sacred geometry they learned was their key to unlocking the sort of scientific discoveries that led to their advancements within their technology, such as flying sort of machines and other kind of working with electromagnetic energy for their temples and their monolithic structures that they had. But these beings were not so much into the technology that we think we're in today. They weren't so much into phones or iPads or computers. They were more so into the mind. And the mind being the access to the great web of the universe. Yes, they had documentation and they definitely had writing. Very much like hieroglyphics, and the writing is very similar to the Minoans. Very sacred writing, holy writing, writing of stories of the ancient sort of comings togethers and higher dimensions. But these beings were functioning at a fifth dimensional level, even going higher to even a sixth dimensional level, and working with a more ascended master type of level. And a lot of ascended masters had kind of incarnations in this civilization. And there was also a strong Pleiadian kind of infusion of artistry and sacred sexuality and tantra and all these kinds of seeming practices that are performed in the East, and what we think of the East as India, and we think of the Middle East and these kinds of really ancient lands in association with our idea of the cradle of life in Sumeria. And these beings were very advanced in these type of things. So we think of Kundalini or Tantra or sacred sexuality and birth and metaphysical spirituality, sacred geometry. And they documented it, but they remembered it, holographic memory they had. So they didn't need to write it down or put it in little sort of memory banks in like our computers. They didn't have to do that. They didn't need to remember through a phone or iPad or some kind of device. They remembered it in the mind because their mind was a lot more expansive. And they also were working a lot with the frequencies of the dolphins and whales, which are also fifth dimensional and sixth dimensional beings. Even to this day, 2021, the dolphins and whales are sixth dimensional, seventh dimensional sort of beings. Their relationship with each other, the earth, their spirituality, and their just inherent wisdom is much more evolved than us as today human beings. It's just they're in a different kind of octave of dimensional reality that's is different from us. We can all agree that they are very sophisticated, and they do experience emotion. And they are very wise and tribal, and experience loving relationship, and experience what it is to hunt, to have strategy and sort of techniques and memory. All these kinds of things that we possess is just different, in a different octave of dimensional reality. So these Atlanteans, again, being seafaring beings of Lemuria, very seafaring, like Hawaiians. When we think of Hawaiians and the Hawaiian culture, it's very feminine, very matriarchal. And that's sort of a residue or a remnants of the Lemurians. Hawaii was a part of the Lemurian sort of cluster of large sort of bodies of land. Except Hawaii was, most likely underwater at the time. So Atlantis had a connection, what we think of the Bermuda Triangle, and going up to the Florida Keys in Florida, which is completely underwater at this time, of course. And a lot of the southeast of North America was pretty much underwater. We think of the Bahamas and, this area, and going, further out into the Atlantic Sea. And these Lemurians, they established themselves pretty well as sort of more of a Hawaiian kind of culture, right? Or we think of the sort of Indonesia as the kind of sacred ceremonies and blessings and offerings that we assume to be a sort of belonging to indigenous people. But Lemurians, were very much considered indigenous people. These beings, their skin was somewhat brown, dark, kind of like Hawaiians, and did have an indigenous kind of appearance, long brown hair. These beings were not necessarily white, Caucasian. They were more so, when we think of like the Hawaiians or Indonesians, brown skin that can get very dark, almost black, due to their, their movement outside, as they are more outside type of beings, where they don't cover themselves with all this technology that blocks out the sunlight, like New York City, where you got to go basically into the park to really get some real sunlight. And everything was pretty good with Atlantis and the integration from Lemuria into Atlantis. But Lemuria, again, was very much a longer time in Lemuria than in Atlantis, as we will soon discover the kind of experiences in Atlantis that kind of led to a sort of interference with the timelines of Earth that brought about where we are today. And we always wonder, why do we always feel like slaves? And why is we keep struggling with this idea of slavery, and this slavery stuff has been on us humans for so long, and it's just never ending, this kind of slavery type of work slave kind of society, where there's always some kind of elite group that organizes all these people who are basically slaves to do their work, while they benefit and get all the energy, and humans are just kind of don't really get much. It's like, where does this come from? So we wonder about like the Lumerians. Like, okay, who created the Lumerians? Do they just come here, just poof? So the whole story of we think of the cradle of life of Sumeria, right? In our current understanding of history, there's a story of the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki basically are belonging to the planet Nibiru. We think of the 12th planet, right? But we don't really think of it. But planet Nibiru kind of cycles around, comes in our sort of view on Earth every around 3,000 years or so. And planet Nibiru, which is probably moving outside of our system, facing away from us right now, is the home of the Anunnaki, or seen of these giant beings. And even in the Greek philosophy of the giant Zeus, right? These giant gods who come to Earth and who are sort of like the leaders and commanders of humans. And humans are just little tiny things. And these gods are like they're rulers. They're worshipped, glorified. They're the creators. The Zeus and all of these gods to the Greeks, right? It's very similar to the Anunnaki, these giant beings. Winged beings are seen as gods, creators, rulers, leaders, commanders who watch over humans, like the same Greek sort of gods, watch over humans and have watched over every decision they make. According to the Anunnaki stories, that we were created out of sort of slavery to mine gold for the Anunnaki, because they needed gold for their harmonizing of their electromagnetic field on their planet Nibiru. So originally Anunnaki was mining gold for the planet Nibiru, and then there was a revolt, and they said, I don't want to mine gold anymore, and then they created humans in sharing DNA with the Syrians, and the humans would mine for gold. And in Africa, that happened for a long time, and thousands of years. And then, humans were sterile, so they couldn't procreate, so there was no problem. If they died, they died, and the only only beings who could procreate humans would be the Anunnaki. They would have to, create another human, because all humans were sterile, so there was no opportunity for humans to have their own kind of families. So it's kind of where we come from. And of course, human beings, we took back our power and we said no, and then we broke away, we broke free, and as human beings, we tend to be quite revolutionary and quite independent-minded, and we like to do our own thing. We don't like to be ruled as human beings because of, we were created out of intense rulership, right? Even today, we think of communism as kind of the same type of ordeal where we have no say. We have no say over our body, over our kids, over our education, over our social status, over our work. We give all our power away to this higher entity, this elite group that is seen to be the superior, and we just have to submit and do whatever it says. We as human beings are quite, we're very revolutionary, like I said, and has served us well, but has created a lot of warlike behavior due to interference with other group of beings that we will later discover. So when we think of like the Lumerians, they're a product of the sort of revolution, one of the first revolutions to all the countless, numerous revolutions we've had since then. Freedom. And this was the first revolution that led to the Africa. And the whole story of, how did the beings that broke away, who were sterile, how did they become fertile? And the whole story of, Adam and Eve eating the apple. Not supposed to be fertile, according to Anunnaki. But in the land of Gondwana land, if I pronounce it correctly, which is an island off of Africa, South Africa, the west side of South Africa. Gondwana land is seen as the place in the shamans of Africa as well. The sages, can all agree, is the place of the Garden of Eden. These Anunnakis did live on Earth temporarily. Maybe watchers, protectors, and Gondwana land was the place where the human beings took their fertility and changed the game. Eating from the garden kind of rewrote history for human beings, in the way that we took our fertility. Somehow in the eating from the garden made us fertile, able to procreate. That led to the freedom, and led to our ability to see for ourselves what we can create and destroy. And over time, Lemurians were like the sort of the mastery of humans over many thousands of years. From tribal into tribal with technology, through the smarts of themselves, through one's own smart and one's own capability to connect to the universe. But in Lemuria, we're still pretty adolescent. We're nowhere near the level of the Anunnaki or the Martians or the Syrians. We're adolescent compared to them. We may have technologies and sacred geometry and all the kinds of creative esoterics of the universe, but we don't have much maturity with it. We haven't been around the block too many times to consider ourselves a teacher. We're still growing and still learning what it means, these type of, metaphysical, spiritual kind of truths and laws and principles that govern, time and space continuum. So Atlantis. So everything was created, the sacred geometry brought about, a pretty stable civilization. It's actually pretty balanced within the masculine and the feminine. Yes, it is primarily more feminine with ritualistic and spiritual and more imaginative and into the arts such as music and sound and into art and sort of philosophy and meditation and spirituality and very psychic beings, very, very psychic. Mediums, very shamanistic, transcendental, all these kinds of, discoveries pretty much kind of were foundations to a lot of, meditative practices. We think of the Tibetan monks or the Buddhist monks that spend so many hours meditating upon these mantras or these kinds of, ritualistic kind of settings. They found these things within themselves. And what happened is, over time, thousands of years in Atlantis, Hebrews came. The Hebrews are very advanced, coming from a different planetary system outside of this solar system. And they arrived on Earth needing to learn their lessons about fifth dimensional kind of reality. So they came because they needed to learn the lessons. In some way they wanted to skip ahead. And they wanted to get to higher dimensional realities, but they needed to complete their lesson on the fifth dimensional. And the Hebrews were, they had their own spirituality that was different from the Lemurians. They had their own kind of understandings that were actually more well-rounded and complete understandings of, the sacred geometry. They brought a whole new kind of realm of sacred geometry to the Atlanteans that really brought Atlantis to a whole new era of its kind of science and technology due to the Hebrews. And Hebrews also have their own kind of knowledge of time and space outside the barriers of the solar system, because they've had kind of relationships outside the solar system, a galaxy even, with other sort of planetary systems and other sort of dimensional realities that are much higher than the Atlanteans have kind of voyaged. They have voyaged through dimensions the Atlanteans have never. And they were seen as, they were protectors, seen that they could safeguard. They would help the Atlanteans not kind of, they would help to safeguard them so they wouldn't make the mistakes they made in their kind of growing and development with their technology. And the Hebrews, when we think of the Hebrews today, again, were somewhat of a humanoid, right? We think of the Hebrews as sort of larger eyes, brown skin, curly hair. These Hebrews, again, they were different looking from the Lemurian Atlanteans, but they definitely were like a sort of humanoid. There was some kind of connection to Earth. And that's why the Hebrews came to Earth, because they had a connection to Earth through some kind of interaction in a higher dimensional or a seventh dimensional kind of sort of space holding. They had some kind of higher dimensional Earth that they were working with, but they needed to get to a lower dimensional Earth known as the fifth in Atlantis to master something that they needed to master, but they could only master in the fifth. They couldn't move forward or progress with whatever it is in these dimensional realities without getting some kind of lesson. So they kind of went backwards in their kind of study. It's like going back to earlier classwork that you took maybe years ago, to kind of have a review. Something's missing. There's something you need to know that maybe you forgot in your earlier classwork. So that really brought about a great it helped Atlanteans mature even more so, okay, to grow up, right? They were like big brothers and sisters to the Atlanteans, helped them to grow up. And Hebrews would even sort of create the pre-dynastic Egypt. We think of Atlanteans and they going where they go, right? It's really like the Hebrews went to pre-dynastic Egypt that actually created the Egypt we know, with the Syrian kind of infusion and influence. The Hebrews were actually the original sort of leaders of Egypt. But before we think of the dynastic Egypt we think today, whereas a lot of slavery of the Hebrew type of beings, as they were overthrown from their position of power by a sort of stronger group that wanted elite control and didn't support the Hebrews' kind of agenda of freedom and these type of things. They didn't want that for other human beings, especially when the population was getting very large. It was more of a communist type of agenda when we think of. So the Hebrews were overthrown and they were basically derobed and their powers relinquished, and they became just like commoners and couldn't even practice their teachings, right? Or their teachings would become the Egyptians' kind of foundation to Egyptian kind of ceremonies, rituals, and advancements in the realm of dimensional time-space understanding. The group that came in this great story, the group that came that nearly kind of changed everything and brought about a lot of interference and even kind of damage to the natural process of human beings, from the Gondwana land to Lemuria to Atlantis, and so on. The Martians. We don't think of Mars as a place that had life, but we know instinctually, because we're drawn to Mars in our future. Mars was actually a planet like Earth. It had mountains, rivers, oceans. It's a beautiful, beautiful planet. It's very beautiful. And, the Martians were very hotheads, very warlike, very masculine. When we think of the Romans and the gladiator races and, this kinds of fighting, just for fighting, right? The Martians were fighting each other over leadership. Who's the leader? No, I am the leader. It's kind of like the medieval period. It's like a king kills a king, or a noble kills a king to be king, and it just kind of goes on because I want to be king, and I'm willing to kill to be king, and we all know that. We know the medieval ages, and we know that it's just a bunch of fighting, and commoners are just kind of in the midst of just being nobles, and elites just fighting amongst themselves over who's the leader. Not really caring if they have good leadership, just caring about the sort of power, the power. Just I want the power, right? And I'm willing to kill for the power, just because I'm in the ego. I'm just in the, gaining power, even killing for power makes me think that I can master reality, time, space, but really it's a cheat. You don't really master anything. It's just a cheat. It's just constant battling for power that just never holds, and power that's actually destructive and is damaging, and you can't really cheat the laws of the universe. Unfortunately, you can't. Or fortunately, you can't. There's a balance. There's fairness. There's always a justice. We think of Brahman, a bigger force that governs everything. Even the governor governs this person. The most supreme leader is governed, so that no one is getting out of control and creating all kinds of tears, scars, and damages within the universe, doing whatever they want to whoever they want. So the Martians, they were very populated, and it became out of control, and they just couldn't get out of that warlike crap. Similar to today, there's a lot of countries that just can't seem to get out of their hate for other countries, just can't seem to get out of their stubbornness, can't seem to get out of their need to create more fighting. It's addicted to it. Because these patriarchal men just don't have any voice of reason, because they're so imbalanced, they don't even know what they're doing. So these Martians, they knew that, okay, it's coming to an end on this this planet, and they did eventually. A nuclear type of explosion led to the tear in the electromagnetic field, the atmosphere, that created this big cloud of red that made it very quickly Mars could not sustain life. So very like the stories of Star Wars and these type of things, it's very similar to Mars. The story of Mars, these beings were very advanced, and it's very much like Star Wars and Star Trek and the story of the Dunes. It's very similar. These patriarchal leaders fighting amongst themselves, and kind of just control, power struggle, power plays. And stuck in it. It's like, don't know how to get out of it. It's like you're stuck in a dimensional reality that you have no idea the key to unlocking other dimensional realities. So the Martians, they didn't know how to awaken their Merkaba, their inner Merkaba. Yes, they had technologies out externally, but they didn't know how to work the technology of their own mind-body system. That's why they were kind of stuck in this dimensional stuff, that they didn't really know how to travel outside the dimensional realities, the barriers. because they had no love, no real love, compassion, because their emotionality and spirituality is squandered and basically damaged by their traumas that they just got out of hand. The femininity was completely squandered. Yes, there was some kind of femininity, but like women of Rome, it was very women that were very more masculine. Warrior women. They had warrior women. Women that are nothing like Atlantis women. These women were tough, fierce. These women, no BS, real confident, courageous. And one of the women was the face of one of these warrior queens was the face of a sphinx on Mars. A warrior queen who was very fierce, like kind of we think of Noah's Ark, right? Or the sort of women of Spain, right? The queens of Spain who were very warrior-like, very take charge, very commanding, militant. And the men were even more so. They were aggressive, hostile, just no sense of compassion or empathy, or just my way. Very, no BS, even frightening. And that's the kind of way they were. It's not necessarily negative or positive, it's just what they chose to be over many decisions that led to that. And a lot of these Martian beings, they came outside the solar system. Again, they kind of came from Sirius. Again, they came from Sirius. Sirius got too populated. And it got a little bit too heated, we'll say, there's so many different groups of extraterrestrials, so many different groups of beings, and were living there, kind of like refuge. It's a place of like a lot of different refuges, and there's just so much going on that they left, and okay, we're going to go to Mars. And at the time, Earth was just a rock, millions of years ago. Earth was just like kind of rock. There was no indication of any kind of life millions of years ago. So they didn't learn their lesson. They failed the lesson, and we'll try it again. We'll try to maybe next time not make these decisions that lead to us having to leave Mars because of this kind of nuclear thing due to fighting. So they went to Earth through a Merkaba, a giant Merkaba, like a giant pyramid, much larger. It might even be large as the Himalayan mountain. Very big, much bigger than the Giza pyramids. Would go into the sky, basically, would go into the atmosphere where you could climb the top and you wouldn't even be able to breathe. That's how much pressure you would feel if you would climb to the top. It's like the Everest, going to the top of Mount Everest. And they use this pyramids machine, Merkaba, to cross through time and space to go to Earth about, sometime in the future, right? Going into the future. And where Earth actually has life, right? Has stable life and has sort of as equilibrium in the 5 elements, and it can be terraformed somewhat to match the life of the Martians, but it didn't need to be because there was already beings living there, and it was already pretty engineered, right? It was engineered naturally, but also engineered by the higher forces that go even beyond the Martians and beyond the most advanced Anunnaki. Helped facilitate this kind of dimensional reality to be successful on Earth. So they came to Atlantis, right? Martians, they're quite, I wouldn't say tainted, but because when they were in Sirius and they had access to all kinds of different beings, it was very saturated, they were, we'll say, street smart meets galactic smart. Right, they've been around the block a couple times. They're pretty ancient beings. They've seen things. They've seen other solar systems. They've seen other aliens. They've seen all kinds of different types of groups of aliens and different types of agendas. And while Atlanteans were pretty innocent, they didn't really leave the solar system. They didn't really want to. They didn't really try. You know? Yes, they were of Anunnaki and the Sirians and Pleiadians, but they weren't really going there. They weren't really going to Pleiades and Sirius and planet Nibiru. You know, they were pretty much grounded on the Earth. They didn't really travel outside of the Earth. But the Martians were heavy travelers. They've seen things. And maybe those things they've seen kind of tainted them. It's like when you're street smart and you've seen things and you've gone through things, you know, it grows you up real quick, but also can make you a lot more alert and even more aggressive when you've seen certain things. Like Star Wars, you've seen certain kind of events happen that are, you know, not necessarily comfortable or easy to see, right? So the Mars were very experienced. You know, they were very experienced. And they looked at the Atlanteans like, wow, like you haven't even traveled outside your solar system? Whoa, like you're babies. Like you have no idea what's out there in this great galaxy. So the Martians were kind of egotistic. They're like, well, we've traveled the galaxy. We know exactly where everything is. We've been there. We've been there. You need to learn a lot from us. But the Atlanteans, they didn't really care to learn about the different type of groups of beings in the galaxy. They didn't really care to participate in that Star Wars type of understanding of life. They didn't really want to participate in that Star Wars type of, you know, story. They didn't really care. They just cared about the earth, connecting to Mother Gaia and the goddesses and the teachings, and just living like a Tao is very simple, very natural, very in their essence. These beings were very in their essence, their soul. The Martians were not so much in their soul. They were in their ego. Prideful, arrogant, selfish. You know, they've had so much struggle with survival and overpopulation, and they've been through all kinds of fighting with leaders, and they've been through genocides, and they don't trust each other, and it's just, the Atlanteans are like, they've gone through none of that. No genocides, none of this, you know, real crazy stuff that we today understand what it is. We today understand the same thing the Martians saw happen on their planet millions of years ago, due to what we have gone through in our dark age and just in our sort of interference that we've had on Earth. So when the Martians came, they really affected everything on Atlantis, and they really sort of disturbed the natural kind of environment, and they even disturbed the natural kind of experience for Atlanteans, as the Atlanteans started to accommodate the Mars and the Martians leaders, and started to kind of infuse their lifestyle into theirs, and it wasn't really a good mix. But they found a middle ground, but the Martians wanted to be the controllers. They wanted to be the emperors. They wanted to be the leaders. They came in right off the bat saying, we're the leaders now. And Atlanteans were like, who are you? Right? So they came in very quick, just wanting to be the boss. Very prideful, thinking they know everything. But really, they may know a lot of things, but they don't really have a lot of learned lessons. They may know things, but they're not very balanced. So what's the point of knowing everything if you're not balanced? And you're just kind of, you know, sort of chaotic with all the information you know. And prideful, egotistic with it. It's like a person who has all the money of the world, but they're just so imbalanced with it. They don't even know what to do with it. They're just kind of like just selfish and incompassionate, and just kind of, they don't even serve anything, right? Just spend it and do things, and it's just kind of an empty win. It doesn't really bring anything to support the growth spiritually, emotionally, physically, to anything, even the self. It's just kind of like, okay, you become stagnant with it. You don't even learn anything. No character development. So the Martians understood, or they didn't understand the feminine movement. They didn't understand. I mean, they had warrior queens, warrior women. They definitely had very powerful women, but they didn't understand this other side of women. Like psychic women, women that are dressed beautiful and walking naked, and, you know, men are very like, innocent and very seeming to them weak, or they're very like sensitive and poetic, and they're like, what are these men? Like, they're weak. Like, compared to the Martians, the men of Atlantis were weak, right? And they didn't like that. They thought these men were like, they looked at them like so weak and pitiful. And they looked at the little innocent women like little lambs, like just vulnerable in a way that's just completely naive. They saw the Atlanteans as naive because the Atlanteans never experienced war, not the way the Martians have. So they saw like Atlanteans as like completely naive, and they thought themselves to be the saviors. Like, they saved Atlantis from possibly, another group of, beings coming in and completely taking advantage of them because they're so vulnerable and naive. But then there was a bunch of wars. I wouldn't say wars, fighting. Disagreements first, and then fighting, and just butting heads. Because Atlanteans had thousands of years of a certain way of like existing, and Mars had a lot more of years, thousands, millions of being the way they are, and all kinds of traumatic experiences and destruction and rebuilding, another destruction, rebuilding, that, they just didn't really get along. So they kind of stayed away from each other. But when the island Atlantis started to be, when certain shifts happened to the poles of the Earth, the axis of the Earth, led to some parts of Atlantis being underwater, just through natural disasters. And then when a sort of meteor or asteroid came and hit South Carolina, it again put more Atlantis underwater. And the Martians did not like that. They didn't like the Atlanteans they were too accepting, right? They were too accepting. They were too like earthy and too like Mother Gaia, and they were just too into this like, let's just be with the earth and not control anything, and we want to honor the earth and the natural things. And the Martians like, oh no, we're done with this. We want to build some things now, and we're going to create a secret society, a secret government that will sort of make that happen. So the Martians did create a secret government, and over time they wanted to completely sort of change the planet. And, because the Martians were considered much older, wiser, and, more experienced, the Atlanteans eventually started to take on the Martians' way of doing things, either by force, by pressure. And, there was a lot more Atlanteans than Martians. There was only about 1,000 Martians at the time of arrival, and, much more, probably 200,000 sort of Atlanteans. It was a small estimate, very small. And, the Martians knew that, they didn't want to do a genocide situation because they've been there, done that, and it doesn't do anything. And they're very smart. They know, okay, this is not going to do anything. It's just going to create more karma. It's going to repeat, and we're just going to repeat the same thing we did on Mars, on Earth. So their secret government, over time, there was, sort of creation. They kind of went to Egypt, a lot of the Martians. When Atlantis kind of, it was still going, even with the development of Egypt, but it was very small. There was only a little part left, and there were still beings living there, but a lot of beings left. They went to, we know it's the Middle East, Africa. They went through the water, the Mediterranean, the Aegean. They went to these kind of seas to kind of recreate the Atlantis in these little areas in the Mediterranean, the Aegean, Red Sea, all these kinds of seas in Africa and Middle East connected. And the Martians, they in collaboration with Syrians, they created this kind of also with, they kind of came to Egypt after the Hebrews sort of created Egypt. The Hebrews really created this new land, and the Martians offered technology, right? And this technology really got out about these pyramids, and everywhere, there was all kinds of beings living on different places. This is when there was a great expansion of pioneering, the next frontier, and all these beings were traveling to these different places. Because the Earth, after this shift of the axis, Earth became more stable, and ecosystems, environments became more stable, and beings wanted to live in their own places, and they created pyramids in these places. It was a signature of, this Merkaba, this as an external representation of the Merkaba, and the sort of advancements with, the fifth dimension, and the ability to, master the inner Merkaba. And these great grand pyramids of Giza and some various other ones were actually created by Martians, because the Hebrews were not so, they worked with stargates, but they had a different form of connecting to other galaxies and whatnot. But the Martians, they wanted to connect to other galaxies through these sort of pyramids that were Merkaba. Basically, Merkaba you can move it, spin it in a way that opens up time and space, right? But the reason why these beings had to leave Atlantis, right, in this great overnight just catastrophe, is because they created a giant Merkaba on Atlantis, and they made it very, very, very big, and it went out of control, and it completely ruined a lot of the natural Merkaba rhythms of Earth. It completely damaged it and distorted it. So this machine is still here today under the sea near the Bermuda Triangle, and it creates a distortion. And even the Martians, they didn't know how to stop it. Even now, they don't know how to stop it, because it's really out of control. It kind of does its own thing. And because it was created, and the karma of that is, we have to kind of live with that. Because even the Ascended Masters, they didn't even necessarily know how to stop that. So it distorts the natural Merkaba of Earth and creates all these kinds of, arrhythmias and the grid points, and it was very, very damaging, detrimental, and it was a lot of the Martians' responsibility. But, Atlanteans were, pretty much for it as well. They were pretty much considered Martians at this time, becoming more masculine, and men and women were becoming warriors and becoming more logical, scientific. There was maybe less focus on art and music and spirituality, and more on science and physics and mathematics and so on. So then there was coming to Egypt. Okay, but Egypt was already pretty much being created by the Hebrews. Were very peaceful, but very sophisticated. It's kind of they're very peaceful, but they're like hidden masters. They're not like Martians, where they're all over the top and ego and I'm the god. They're actually very masterful, like the Martians, except they're very humble. That they are not like the Martians at all, and they don't like the Martians. These prideful people who can't learn their lessons and don't choose to learn their lessons, even though it's kind of becoming repetitive, and it's becoming like repeating the second grade 5 times. It becomes a little bit stupid. It's like you can be so smart, but it's so stupid. So it's So coming into Egypt, there was the Hebrews. In the Hebrews, again, there was these beautiful black Hebrews. There's a lot of the kind of people followed this Hebrew movement. The Africans, followed this Hebrew movement, the spirituality of the Hebrews, and the sacred teachings and the gods, because the Hebrews were very peaceful and humble, and they were very ancient, and they kind of knew what they were talking about, but they were very supportive, and they were very like teachers. They were like professors and teachers, and people liked them. Not like the Martians. People liked these Hebrews, but over time, the Martians kind of wanted to come and wherever there's power, they they want to be in on it. So they came to Egypt as well, and they kind of supported this work slave type of system, because that's what they have on Mars. Before they have a work slave system, like even the Romans. So they kind of went against the Hebrews sort of teachings, and they kind of even try to derobe and discredit and all this kinds of weird stuff, slander, and so they could get the upper hand, right? Very strategic, and that's what we think of as the kind of dynastic Egypt. That's pretty much the latest that we can go back in our history. Within our high school textbooks today is dynastic Egypt, and before that it's very fuzzy and unclear, and it involves dimensional kind of spherical knowledge that we can't get just being bound to the 3 dimensions we know. In order to access these kinds of histories, we would have to have a 5th dimensional understanding of time and space. And if we don't, we're going to find that our history is very fuzzy, and it doesn't make sense at certain parts, because it's not linear, it's actually dimensional, where we're going in and out of these certain higher, lower dimensions, depending on the progressions of where we're at in our 26,000 year progression. So the story ends with the arrival of dynastic Egypt, coming from out of a pre-dynastic Egypt that is very much like Atlantis, but it's even more so advanced, because not only does it have the kind of Atlantean knowledge, but it also starts to have more maturity experience. As Atlanteans are starting to kind of be around the block a couple times and starting to understand, and the Martians really grew up the Atlanteans almost quite aggressively. And pre-dynastic Egypt basically became this surge, right? This sort of, this mixing bowl of all these different beings started to come to Egypt. There's the Hebrews, the original founders, the founding fathers, we'll say, and then there's the kind of Atlanteans, which are also Hebrews, and then, in Roman, the Martians that later became Romans, and the teachings of the Martians and the lifestyle became like the Roman kind of foundation, and that patriarchal cycle that we're in today is actually founded by a Martian type of interference with the masculine part of ourself. The Martians actually molded the masculine part of ourselves to mirror who they are, or what they were on Mars. So very warlike, aggressive, we know Romans, okay? But there's a diplomacy, republic, there's sort of law and order, but it's like Martians, it's very, it's not necessarily balanced, and it's, can be very unjust, okay? And it can be very imprisoning and trapping, even almost very judgmental, negative, and very, very destructive, actually, okay? Manipulative, deceptive, distrustful, dishonoring. to the species, right? That in all other different species. So, and then there was also Pleiadians that were intermixed with ancient pre-dynastic Egypt, about, or before 16,000 years in our past. There was also cat people, known as Syrians, but a different type of group of Syrians that came to learn and grow and all these things. And there was dog people, which were considered a different group of beings. I don't know who they are. And there's all kinds of Lyran beings, and these feline beings really came to Egypt at this time through the Merkaba. They came through the portal of the Merkaba, and then there's reptilians that came, and there's the Zetas, and all kinds of different beings started coming to Earth, because when Earth started sending out this signal of this creative renaissance, right? Other beings they received the signal, right? And they started to come to want to explore and wanted to uncover, okay, what is this place? Right? And also Egypt became a threshold, an interdimensional threshold, where dimensions, lower dimensions, higher dimensions could converge. So you could connect to higher dimensions such as ascended masters and lower dimensions. But there was barriers. It wasn't just a free-for-all. There was laws in place. It wasn't just, whatever could come through. It was laws. But because of the Martians being so driven by power, they became even more kind of egotistic with their rival of these, beings, and, eventually they closed down the dimensional convergence. They closed it down, they shut it, they locked it, they shut it down, the main pyramids, and they shut down the kind of signal, right, as we went away from the center of the galaxy, deeper into what we know as dynastic Egypt, and all these things all the pyramids on the Earth began to shut down. Because all the pyramids, when they're functioning at their highest functionality, actually sends a massive signal out into the universe. And when we're right in the center of, the galaxy where our focus is on Earth, that's when we have this massive kind of connection to other sort of dimensional places, working with all kinds of different beings, lower beings, higher beings, and that's when we have full awareness of the knowledge of the universe. And we are not there now. We're very far from that point, which is good. So we can, easy does it and learn as we go along, and hopefully learn our lessons and not repeat mistakes of the past, which is very important to, not getting caught. Because the Martians, they were stuck in their loop. Thousands of years of just doing the same thing, and it's like they couldn't learn the lesson. It's like you keep having you're attracting the same relationship again and again. It's a different person, but it's the same thing until you learn the lesson. And they didn't want to learn it, or they just didn't have the emotionality or the spirituality to actually learn it, because they were very much imbalanced. It's like you can't grow from an imbalanced state. You have to balance things out, and then healing, growth, clearing can happen. But the Martians didn't have that. So in order to do that, they would have to balance out the feminine and the masculine within them. But, they were very set in their ways. As a 7-year-old man, asking a 7-year-old man to change his ways, I don't know if that can happen. Especially someone who's very powerful man, asking him to be, when he's 7 years old and he's been a certain way, asking him to be something else, or to balance something else, to embody something else, or to shift or to change. Whoa, no. So, and now we are here where we want to go to Mars. And we are looking to Mars as the future, and we will terraform Mars. And we will start colonies on Mars, and we will have experiences on Mars. But the great question of this story An ending always brings a new beginning. The question of the story is, will we repeat the same mistakes? Will we end up being like the Martians were? Or will we find balance and clear the path, clear the karma, the samskaras, and clear out anything that we may repeat that basically keeps us entrapped in this kind of constant repeating experience that probably isn't giving us real integrity with ourselves, or honesty with ourselves, a real kind of fullness and harmony, equilibrium with ourselves. So the question we must ask ourselves today as we're going to Mars, we look at Earth as extinction or destruction, or it's going to end, and we're not going to be here much longer, maybe 2 generations, and then the Earth is something's going to happen, and humanity's going to become overpopulated, and poison and chemicals and whatever it is that's going to happen. But the Earth will always survive. The Earth can clean and clear. It's just us, we survive. When the great flood came, Noah created the ark. Just out of sheer luck, he found out that information. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the lessons we need to learn? Because a lot of our kind of interactions with each other mirror a lot of the Martians' karma millions of years ago, with war and these these patriarchal imbalances. Women are oppressed. There's this division, and these warring tribes, and these genocides, and these kind of enslavement, and these kind of power seekers who are egotistic and prideful, and these elites, these secret governments that just kind of want to have control over everything. It's very much kind of mirroring a lot of what the Martians were millions of years ago. And we know where that happened, what that led them. Basically, we're at the start of going in a path where we could repeat the same thing. Or we too become very aggressive. We're in our survivor. We become very imbalanced. And when we're imbalanced, we can't heal fast enough to actually to safeguard our technology, safeguard ourselves, and be a voice of reason, so that we don't become too stubborn, too set in our ways, that we're just judgmental, and then hateful, and then violent. So we have to decide, where is the balance that we need within ourselves and in the community and just within this planet? We can say it's too far gone, but there's dimensional realities. And this third dimension may be coming to closing, and may come to closing in destruction and chaos, whatever it is, natural disasters. There's so many things. The Earth will kind of survive, right? And it will heal, maybe take thousands of years, as Mars is healing from the last kind of nuclear situation. Mars can be terraformed in our future. It's actually healed, but it took millions of years to heal, right? And to the point where it could be terraformed appropriately. We have to decide, do we want Earth to kind of be like that? Or the third dimension is coming to a close? The fifth dimension is becoming available. And I think the only way that we're going to be able to survive this kind of whatever it is that's kind of trauma in us or imbalanced in us through interference, so much interference from all these, not just Martians, so many different groups have come here and put in their 2 cents. And we have to kind of go to the fifth dimension so we can have a mastery over the physical reality. Because the fifth dimension has a mastery over the physical reality. Everything that happens in the 3D, there's a working in the 5D. But when the 5D and the 3D are not connected, it's like unconscious and conscious are not connected,
then we're not utilizing the 5D to our fullest advantage, because we can go into the 5D, we can construct things there, and then pull it into the 3D. It's almost like advanced technology is you're creating a blueprint, you're putting into some kind of holographic, technology, and then it can basically print it out. You could even print out maybe an organ, right? You say, I need a heart with this type of blood or this type of, right? And it can print it out. That's the 5D. To us, it seems impossible, but the 5D is just that. It can construct things and then pull it into the 3D, and also is the opening to higher dimensions, right? But the 5D is the anchor, right? A lot of times you create in the 5D and it kind of, you print it out into the 60 to 70, higher D, right? More physical has to do with 5D. Physical, right? Physical healing, physical body, how to transmute, how to transform, transmute, transcend the physical body is through that 5D. And it's open to us now because we are now in the age of remembrance, moving towards the center of the galaxy again. So this is the story of Atlantis and the Martians.